She walked quietly into the lecture hall, a pregnant black woman in a faded cardigan. When the racist professor forced her to solve an impossible equation, everyone exchanged smirks. They were about to witness mathematics history, and the most satisfying comeuppance this university had ever seen. The lecture hall at Georgia State University buzzed with anticipation as Professor Richard Harrington made his way to the podium. His reputation preceded him. Distinguished mathematician, department head, and notorious for his disdain toward anyone he deemed intellectually inferior, especially minorities. Maya Johnson slipped into the back row, smoothing her simple gray cardigan over her visibly pregnant belly. At 42, with weathered skin that told stories of overseas deployments, she stood out among the graduate students. The former Army sergeant who had served 15 years, specializing in cryptography and communications, wasn't there to blend in. She was there to learn. Today's symposium will address Riemann's hypothesis and its implications for quantum computing, Harrington announced, his voice commanding immediate silence. His silver beard and tailored blue suit projected authority as his eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on Maya. His mouth twitched with subtle disapproval. She'd seen that look before, the quick assessment, the dismissal. It was the same look she'd received when she'd applied for the university's facilities management position 3 years ago after leaving the military. The same look that followed her through 2 decades as a black woman in uniform, and now as an expectant mother pursuing her passion for mathematics. Maya straightened her posture slightly. The military bearing never quite leaves. And opened her notebook, her dark eyes alert and focused despite the 12-hour shift she completed just hours earlier. The symposium began with presentations from doctoral candidates. Maya took meticulous notes, her eyes lighting up during discussions of mathematical theories. When the floor opened for questions, her hand remained down. Experience had taught her that people like her weren't expected to speak in rooms like this. During the break, Maya overheard 2 students whispering, "Who's the pregnant cleaning lady taking notes?" One snickered, probably just auditing for continuing education credits. The other replied dismissively, "Harrington hates when non-mathematics people attend these things, especially, you know." Maya gripped her notebook tighter but maintained her composed expression, a skill honed through years of maintaining dignity in the face of prejudice both in and out of uniform. They didn't know that mathematics had been her companion since childhood, that she had used complex algorithms to enhance military communication security during her deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. They couldn't see how she had taught herself advanced calculus between night shifts while sending money home to her aging parents. They had no idea that the military had recognized her mathematical aptitude, but channeled it into practical applications rather than theoretical exploration. As the symposium resumed, Professor Harrington presented his controversial approach to an unsolved mathematical problem. His explanation was elegant, but contained a subtle flaw Maya immediately recognized. She'd spent countless nights exploring this very equation, finding solace in numbers when the world around her felt chaotic. "Any questions?" Harrington asked, his tone suggesting he expected none worth answering. The room remained silent until Maya, almost involuntarily, raised her hand. The moment her arm went up, she regretted it. Every head turned. Professor Harrington's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Yes, ma'am," he said, deliberate condescension coating his words, his eyes flicking dismissively to her pregnant belly. "I was wondering about the variable transformation in step 4, Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Wouldn't that create inconsistencies when applied to the boundary conditions?" The room went silent. Several students exchanged glances. Professor Harrington's expression hardened. "Your name?" he demanded. "Maya Johnson." "And your department?" Harrington's voice dripped with presumption. Maya hesitated. "I work in facilities management." A ripple of whispers spread to the audience. Harrington's face shifted from surprise to amusement. "Facilities management," he repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "How interesting. And you believe you found an error in my work." Maya's cheeks flushed. Not an error exactly, just a potential complication that perhaps. Harrington interrupted. "Instead of questioning established mathematical principles, you should focus on more accessible pursuits." His eyes deliberately scanned her pregnant form and dark skin. There are many simpler paths better suited to some people. Several students laughed. Maya felt her face burn hotter as she shrank back into her seat, wishing she'd never raised her hand. She thought of the times in the military when her insights were overlooked until a white male officer repeated them. Some things never change, uniform or not. Professor Harrington wasn't done. Having found an easy target, he seemed determined to make an example of Maya. Since our guest from facilities management has such confidence in mathematical theory, he said, straightening his tie with deliberate slowness, perhaps she'd like to demonstrate her expertise. He gestured toward the chalkboard. Come forward, Miss Johnson. Maya froze. Every instinct told her to decline, to escape. But something deeper, pride perhaps, or the exhaustion of being underestimated, or the memory of younger black women in her unit who had looked to her for example, pushed her to her feet. The walk to the front of the lecture hall felt endless. Each step echoed against the hardwood floor as whispers followed her path. She could feel eyes on her pregnant belly, on her worn shoes, on her dark skin. She took the chalk from Harrington's outstretched hand, careful not to make direct eye contact. The military had taught her to choose her battles wisely, and right now, she needed to focus on the equation, not the man's contempt. Let's make this accessible, Harrington said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The word accessible dripped with condescension. He turned to the board and wrote a complex differential equation. Maya recognized it immediately, a problem from advanced multivariate calculus. Difficult, but certainly not impossible for someone with proper training, or someone who had used similar principles to optimize military communication systems under enemy fire. Take your time, Harrington said with false generosity. We're all eager to learn from diverse perspectives. More laughter rippled through the audience. Maya felt her hand trembling slightly as she stared at the board. Behind her, someone whispered, "This is painful to watch." Dr. James Williams, a visiting professor from MIT seated in the front row, frowned at Harrington's display, but remained silent, watching Maya with curious interest. Maya took a deep breath, the same breathing technique she'd used before leading her team through minefields. The numbers and symbols on the board began to arrange themselves in her mind, falling into patterns she'd recognized since childhood. She'd never had formal education beyond community college and military training, but mathematics had been her refuge during long nights on deployment, after her husband died in combat, during pregnancy complications when doctors told her a woman her age shouldn't expect a healthy baby. She raised the chalk and made her first mark. Perhaps we should simplify, Harrington began, but stopped when he saw Maya confidently writing. The room grew quiet as she worked methodically through the problem. Her initial nervousness faded as she lost herself in the elegant dance of mathematics. She wasn't in a judgmental lecture hall anymore. She was in her own mind, where numbers had always made perfect sense. After 2 minutes of absolute silence, Maya finished the final step, placed the chalk down and stepped back, one hand instinctively resting on her belly. Harrington stared at the board, his expression shifting from smugness to confusion. He scanned her work, looking for mistakes but found none. The solution was not only correct, but executed with surprising elegance. That's correct, he admitted reluctantly, though anyone with basic calculus training could have managed it. Dr. Williams's eyebrows raised slightly as he exchanged glances with colleague. Harrington, unwilling to concede defeat so easily, quickly erased the board. Let's try something more challenging, he said, the edge in his voice more pronounced. Something from my current research. He wrote a new equation, one Maya didn't immediately recognize. This wasn't standard curriculum. It was cutting-edge theoretical mathematics, the kind published in specialized journals. This problem has implications for quantum computing encryption, Harrington explained to the room, though his eyes remained fixed on Maya. If you'd prefer to return to your seat, I would certainly understand. The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown. The room held its collective breath, waiting for Maya's retreat. Instead, she picked up the chalk again. Maya examined the new equation, her initial confidence wavering. This was different, complex, abstract, with notation she'd never encountered in her self-study. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe she had overstepped. Maybe Harrington was right about her place. The silence in the room grew heavier as seconds ticked by. Students leaned forward in anticipation, some with pity in their eyes, others with barely disguised amusement. "As I suspected," Harrington said, reaching for the chalk. "Wait," Maya said quietly, pulling the chalk back. Something had clicked, a pattern within the chaos of symbols. She remembered an article she'd read last month during her lunch break, hunched over a library computer. It had discussed a novel approach to quantum encryption mathematics. She began to write, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. The tension in the room shifted as students exchanged confused glances. Even Harrington's smug expression faltered as he watched Maya work through the problem with unexpected skill. Dr. Williams sat forward, his eyes widening as he watched Maya's approach. It wasn't just that Maya was solving the problem. She was taking an unconventional route, one that showed remarkable intuition. The same intuition that had once helped her team intercept and decode enemy communications in situations where traditional approaches failed. Halfway through the solution, Maya paused, frowning at her work. There was a barrier. The equation seemed to lead to a dead end. Harrington's mouth curled into a satisfied smile. "A valiant attempt," he said, reaching again for the chalk. Maya didn't relinquish it. Instead, she stared at the board, her mind racing. The room faded away as she focused entirely on the problem before her. Then, like a key turning in a lock, she saw the pathway forward, an elegant transformation that would simplify the entire equation. It was the same kind of intuitive leap she'd made during a critical mission when standard protocols had failed. She began writing again, more confidently now. The scratching of chalk against board was the only sound in the hushed hall. When she applied her transformation, audible gasps came from the front row where the senior faculty sat. Dr. Williams whispered something to his colleague, who nodded vigorously. Harrington's face had lost all color. He was no longer watching Maya's solution with disdain, but with growing alarm. What she was doing shouldn't have been possible, especially not from someone without formal training. A black woman, pregnant, from facilities management. "That's not the standard approach," he said sharply. Maya didn't respond. She couldn't. She was too deeply immersed in the mathematics, in a state of flow she'd experienced all her life when working with numbers. She wasn't just solving Harrington's problem. She was improving upon it, finding efficiencies he hadn't seen. As she neared completion, tensions had shifted dramatically. The students who had laughed earlier were now silent, their expressions a mixture of confusion and respect. The professors in the front row were whispering urgently among themselves. Harrington himself seemed caught between contradictory impulses, a desire to maintain his authority and a professional fascination with the mathematical insight unfolding before him. Maya had nearly reached a solution when Harrington suddenly moved aboard, examining her work closely. His finger traced one particular transformation she had used. "The simplification," he said, his voice tight with contained emotion. "Where did you learn it?" Maya finally looked at him directly. "I didn't learn it. I just saw it." Their eyes met in a moment of silent confrontation. The prestigious professor and the pregnant facilities worker standing before an equation that was bridging their worlds in ways neither had anticipated. Before Harrington could respond, Dr. Williams stood up from his seat. "That's the Lou Takahashi method," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. "Except it was only published in the International Journal of Quantum Mathematics last month." He fixed Maya with an intense stare. "How could you possibly know about it?" The question hung in the air as every eye in the room turned to Maya. Maya stared at the chalk in her hand, suddenly aware of the crossroads before her. For years, she had hidden her ability, convinced that no one would believe a black woman, a single mother, a veteran working in maintenance, could understand advanced mathematics. She'd been comfortable in the shadows, learning quietly, keeping her passion private. But now, exposed in the spotlight, she had to choose: retreat into the safety of anonymity or stand in her truth. "I didn't know it was called the Lou Takahashi method," she said, her voice stronger now. "I've never had formal training beyond community college and military courses in cryptography." "Impossible," Harrington scoffed, though his voice lacked conviction. "These concepts require years of specialized education." Dr. Williams approached the board, examining Maya's work more closely. "Yet here it is," perfectly executed. He turned to Maya. How? Maya took a deep breath. The weight of everyone's attention pressed against her. In that moment, she thought of her unborn child, who would one day look to her example of courage or compromise. Mathematics has always made sense to me, Maya said simply. When I look at equations, I see patterns, connections. Solutions reveal themselves if I look long enough. But you work in maintenance. Why aren't you? Because life happens, Maya interrupted, a hint of steel entering her voice. I served 15 years in the Army. My husband died in combat. I needed stable work with health insurance. She gestured to her pregnant belly and then to the partially completed solution on the board. This doesn't pay bills or provide health care. The room fell silent as the reality of her circumstances settled over the academic audience. But why attend the symposium? Harrington asked, genuinely puzzled now rather than condescending. Maya met his gaze steadily. Because I love mathematics. Because learning doesn't stop when life gets complicated. The chalk fell heavy in her hand as she turned back to the board. The unfinished equation waited, along with a decision that would change the trajectory of her life. A young black woman in the third row raised her hand tentatively. Ms. Johnson, she called out, her voice trembling slightly. I'm a first-generation student. Seeing you do this, it matters. Maya felt something warm unfold in her chest. She hadn't considered how her moment might affect others, especially those who rarely saw themselves represented in these elite spaces. She turned back to the board, chalk poised. I'm going to finish this, she said, more to herself into the room full of academics. 6 months later, Maya Johnson stood in front of a different classroom, this one smaller, with eager undergraduate faces, watching her explain a complex theorem. The sleeves of her new cardigan were pushed up as she wrote across the whiteboard. No longer hesitant or apologetic about claiming space, her life had transformed with breathtaking speed. After that symposium, Dr. Williams had arranged an emergency fellowship, recognizing that talent like Maya's couldn't wait for traditional academic timelines. Her baby boy, now 6 weeks old, slept peacefully in a carrier nearby as she lectured. The university had established a groundbreaking program combining childcare support with academic opportunity after a case highlighted the talent lost through systemic barriers. 2 of her theoretical approaches had already been published with her name listed as the primary author. Professor Harrington had come around too, though it had taken time and several departmental meetings where he'd been outvoted. The biggest change, though, was internal. Maya no longer hid her intelligence or passion. She spoke with authority about her work, knowing her value didn't derive from credentials, but from the power of her mind and the strength of her journey. Never be afraid to raise your hand, she told her students. The question you're afraid to ask might change everything. If Maya's journey from overlooked to extraordinary touched your heart, remember that genius exists in unexpected places, often hidden by circumstances, not lack of ability. Who might you be underestimating in your own life? Have you ever been judged by your appearance rather than your abilities? We'd love to hear your stories of hidden talents discovered. Where are you watching from today? Share in the comments below and respect each other's experiences. If you enjoyed this story of recognition and transformation, please subscribe for more glimpses of extraordinary moments that change lives forever. Sometimes the greatest minds aren't found in lecture halls, but cleaning them.